In the heart of Guinea, nestled between dense forests and towering hills, lay the village of Kourouma. It was a place of laughter, music, and abundant harvest until the curse began. Every full moon, Kourouma would vanish without a trace, leaving behind only an eerie silence and the rustling of trees in the wind. No one who disappeared with the village ever returned. No one who had entered it on the night of the full moon had ever been seen again. Fear gripped people from neighboring villages, and soon Kourouma became a whispered legend, a place where mothers warned their children never to seek out. But legends have a way of calling to the curious. One night, under the glow of a near full moon, a wandering hunter named Diallo strayed too far into the forest. He was a man of the forest, a traveler by nature, unafraid of shadows. The tales of the vanishing village had reached his ears, but he had dismissed them as mere superstition. That night, however, fate had other plans for him. As the moon climbed higher, Diallo found himself at the edge of a village that was not supposed to exist. Lanterns burned, the air was filled with the scent of roasting meat, and the sound of drums echoed through the night. He frowned. This was impossible. Kourouma was gone, or at least it was supposed to be. Yet here it stood before him, lively and welcoming. And so, curiosity led him forward, unaware that he had just stepped into the heart of an ancient curse. Diallo tightened his grip on his bow, and as he stepped into the village, the scent of burning wood mixed with the aroma of food, and the distant sound of drumming filled the air. It was as if the village was celebrating, unaware of its sinister reputation. He scanned his surroundings. Clay huts lined the narrow path, and villagers moved about, laughing, drinking, and dancing. But something felt off. Their eyes carried an unnatural brightness, and their movements were too smooth, too perfect, as if they were part of a performance they had rehearsed 1,000 times before. A man dressed in flowing white robe approached him, his wide smile revealing unnaturally white teeth. "Stranger, you honor us with your presence," the man said, bowing slightly. "I am Omar, the chief of Kourouma. Join us in our feast. It is rare to have visitors," he said. Diallo hesitated. He had roamed many lands and encountered many people, but something about this village sent a chill down his spine. "I have heard stories about this place," Diallo said carefully. "They say Kourouma vanishes every full moon." The chief's smile never faltered. "Stories are only as real as the fear they create, my friend. Tonight, you are our guest. Eat, drink, and let the night embrace you." Something in his tone made Diallo's skin prickle, but his hunger won over his caution. He followed the chief to a large fire where a feast was laid out: roasted meat, fresh fruits, and palm wine. The villagers cheered as he sat among them, handing them a gourd filled with sweet-smelling wine. Diallo took a sip, but as soon as the liquid touched his lips, a whisper echoed in his ear, "Run!" His heart lurched. He turned sharply, but the villagers continued to laugh and feast as if they heard nothing. He put the guard down. "Who whispered just now?" he asked, his voice low. Omar chuckled. "The night carries many sounds, my friend." But Diallo knew what he heard. He forced a smile and ate sparingly. His senses heightened. Then the drums stopped. The entire village froze. The air became heavy, thick with something unseen. The villagers slowly turned their heads toward the full moon. their expressions blank, as if they were possessed, and then, one by one, they began to flicker, like flames caught in the wind. Their bodies wavered, their forms becoming translucent. The huts, the fire, even the ground beneath Diallo's feet shimmered as though made of mist. Panic surged through him. He jumped to his feet, but Omar's cold hand caught his wrist. "You cannot leave now," the chief whispered. "The curse is not yet broken." The last thing Diallo saw before darkness consumed him was the villagers turning toward him, their eyes glowing like dying embers. Diallo woke to silence. The village was gone. He sat up with a gasp, his body covered in cold sweat. The fire, the music, the villagers, everything had vanished. He was sitting in the middle of an empty clearing, surrounded by towering trees. The only trace of Kourouma was a single hut, old and crumbling hut with vines crawling over its walls. His bow was still in his hand, and his quiver was still full, but the sun was already high in the sky. Had he dreamed it all? No, the whisper still echoed in his ears. "Run!" Diallo stood slowly, his hunter instincts telling him that he was being watched. The air carried an unnatural stillness, like the forest itself was holding its breath. He turned slowly to the lone hut. Someone was inside. Cautiously, he stepped forward and pushed open the wooden door. Inside, sitting in the shadows, was an old woman with milky white eyes. Her skin was wrinkled like dried bark, and her long bony fingers traced symbols into the dust-covered floor. "You should not have stayed the night, Hunter," she croaked. "Now you belong to the curse." Diallo's blood ran cold. "What curse?" The woman sighed. Long before Kourouma became a cursed village, it was a place of unmatched prosperity, she began. It was known for its fertile lands, abundant harvest, and thriving trade. People traveled from distant regions to buy and sell its rarest treasures, rich fabrics, gold trinkets, and spices that carried the scent of distant lands. The villagers of Kourouma had everything they needed. But as time passed, their gratitude faded, replaced by arrogance and greed. They no longer prayed to the spirits of the land, the ones who had blessed them with fortune. Instead, they hoarded their wealth, built larger homes, and turned their backs on those who are less fortunate. The elders, once wise and just, became blind to the suffering around them. The hunters, who once shared their catch with the hungry, began selling their meat for unreasonable prices. Even the healers demanded gold in exchange for medicine, leaving the sick to wither in pain if they could not afford it. The gods watched, the spirits whispered amongst themselves. Then one day, a wandering spirit took the form of a weary traveler and entered Kourouma. Diallo listened to the old woman with keen attention, never interrupting her. The traveler arrived on the night of a great feast. The villagers had just completed their largest harvest yet, and a grand celebration was being held in the village square. Music filled the air, and laughter echoed into the night. Tables were overflowed with food, roasted meats glistening with spices, yams dripping with palm oil, and steaming pots of pepper soup. The traveler, dressed in tattered robes and leaning on a wooden staff, approached the feast with slow steps. His face was hidden beneath a deep hood, but his voice carried an undeniable power. "Kind people of Kourouma," he called out, his voice hoarse, as if he had not spoken in years. "I have traveled for days without food or water. Will you spare me a meal for an old man?" The villagers paused. A few cast glances at the stranger, their expressions unreadable. The chief, Omar, leaned back in his grand chair, a smirk on his lips. "You arrive on a night of joy," Omar said, "but joy is for those who have earned it. We do not give our food freely to beggars." The traveler lowered his head. "I do not seek charity, only kindness." One of the famous traders scoffed. "Kindness is a luxury, old man. If you wish to eat, you must pay like everyone else." The traveler looked around, his gaze settling on a young mother holding a bowl of pounded yam. She averted her eyes and turned away. He sighed. "Is there no one here with a heart willing to give?" Silence everywhere. Finally, an elderly woman, frail and bent with age, stood from the farthest corner of the feast. She hobbled forward, holding a small cracked clay bowl filled with rice. "I have little," she whispered, "but I will share what I have." She reached out to offer the food, but before the traveler could take it, the chief's guards snatched it from her hands and threw it into the dirt. The rice spilled into the dust. The villagers laughed. "Foolish old woman," one of the guards sneered. "You waste your scraps on a stranger while we feast like kings." The traveler remained still, watching as the laughter echoed around him. Then he removed his hood. The laughter died instantly. The traveler's face was not human. His skin shimmered like moonlight on the water, and his eyes burned with an unnatural glow. His presence suddenly felt too large, too powerful for the space he occupied. The air grew thick with unseen energy. Gaps of horror filled the square. The chief stumbled backward. What are you?" he stammered. The spirit's voice was no longer frail or weak. It resonated through the village, shaking the very ground before them. "I am the one who watched over your ancestors," he thundered. "I am the spirit of the land, the giver of your fortune, the guardian of your harvest. And yet, you have grown cruel and selfish. You hoard your own wealth while the hungry starve at your gates. You mock the kindness of the few among you who still have hearts." The villagers trembled. Some dropped to their knees, begging for mercy. Others tried to flee, but their feet would not move. The spirit lifted his staff and drove it into the earth. The ground rumbled beneath them. "I curse you, people of Kourouma. You who have forgotten the ways of generosity shall now be forgotten by the word." A wind unlike any they had ever felt howled through the village. The huts shimmered, their solid forms flickering as if they were made of mist. The people screamed as their bodies wavered, their voices warping into whispers carried by the wind. The chief tried to run, but the spirit's glowing eyes locked onto him. "You, Omar, shall lead your people in this endless fate. Every full moon you shall return to this world, bound to relieve the night of your greatest sin, and each time you will become a traveler into your cursed feast, hoping one will break the spell. But know this, if they fail, they will join you in your suffering." Omar opened his mouth to protest, but his voice was swallowed by the void, and then, in an instant, Kourouma was gone. The land where it once stood was empty, as if no village had ever existed. Only the spirits knew the truth. From that night on, Kourouma became a legend. Travelers spoke of a village that appeared only once on the full moon, welcoming strangers into its endless cursed feast. Some believed in the tale and avoided the area entirely. Others, too bold or too foolish, sought it out and were never seen again. Diallo clenched his jaw, more terrified than he already was. "And the villagers?" he asked. "Their souls are bound to the curse. They relive the same night over and over, forced to welcome any stranger who stumbles upon them. And if the traveler does not escape before the village disappears, she leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. They become part of it, she said. Diallo's stomach twisted. How do I break the curse? He asked. The old woman traced a symbol in the dirt. It looked like an eye with jagged lines running through it. The spirit that cursed this village still lingers. It watches, waiting for someone to right the wrong which these villagers committed. You must find the offering the villagers stole and return it to the sacred tree. What offering? The old woman's eyes darkened. A golden mask, the spirit's face, she said. Diallo took a deep breath. He had spent his life tracking dangerous beasts, facing the unknown, but this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Still, he had no choice. He was now part of the story, and stories demanded endings. Nighttime came quickly. Diallo followed the old woman's directions to the center of the abandoned village. There, beneath a twisted tree with the blackened roots, he found it. A golden mask half buried in the dirt. As soon as he touched it, a chilling scream echoed through the forest. The air grew colder, the ground beneath him trembled, and then the village reappeared. Kourouma materialized in front of him just as it had the night before, but this time the villagers were different. Their smiles were gone, their eyes were filled with desperate hunger. Omar stepped forward, his face twisted in sorrow. You should not have taken it. Diallo held the mask tightly. This belongs to the spirit. I will return it, he said. A low growl rumbled through the air. The trees groaned, the shadows lengthened, twisting into something unnatural. And then it came. A massive, shapeless figure with the glowing eyes emerged from the darkness. Its form flickered like the village, shifting between reality and nightmare. The thief returns my face, the spirit's voice boomed, shaking the earth. But will he survive the price? Diallo did not wait for an answer. He ran toward the sacred tree, the villagers screaming behind him, their voices warped with anguish. The spirit chased him, its monstrous form stretching across the sky. With a final desperate leap, Diallo slammed the golden mask onto the tree's back. Light exploded around him, and the spirit let out a final deafening wail. Then silence. When Diallo opened his eyes, Kourouma was gone for good. The legend of Kourouma faded over time, whispered only in hushed tones, but Diallo never forgot. Some nights, when the moon was full, he could still hear the sound of distant drums, and he knew that some curses never truly failed.